I'm Adam Game, and I am an assistant in the Applied Health and Performance Science department. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing our next speakers. We have Dr. Carl Ohlson and Adrianna Napoletano from Performance Psychology Services, as well as Dr. Nicole DeFerrari of Counseling and Psychology Services here at Penn State. They're going to be presenting to us on the topics of adaptive thinking, resilience, mindfulness, and thriving. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them and let them roll.
Thanks, Adam. So in a moment here, I guess, Nicole, you can go ahead and pull up the slides if you want to. Some of you have actually heard Adrianna and me talk on some of this before. Nobody has heard all of this yet because this is the first time we've gotten a chance to partner with Nicole on a presentation like this. It's really exciting, and in a few minutes, you all are going to see why every day I'm so thankful that I get to work with these pros because they're amazing. The presentation for today explores these four interrelated constructs: adaptive thinking, resilience, mindfulness, and thriving. And today's talk is truly just an introduction. Like, we could easily do a workshop that would take all semester to do something like this. For today, we're just going to kind of hit the highlights. And as you go through and listen to what we're sharing, you're going to see that there's some embedded concepts that transcend the different constructs, right? So you're going to hear some of the same phrases more than once. And that's the nature of something that's interrelated, right? You're just going to hear enduring themes. So we're going to begin with adaptive thinking. So we can go ahead and hit the next slide, please. And actually, we're just going to stay on this one slide for my portion of the talk because it's all right there. So when we talk about adaptive thinking, there's lots of different ways that you can go about this. The particular way that I'm going to refer to this is based on the work of one of my mentors, a guy named Colonel Retired Louis Choka, who developed his approach in response to something the U.S. Army found that it was operating more and more in what's called a VUCA environment. An Army is nothing without its acronym. So VUCA, it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So basically, you're talking about a chaotic environment that's largely outside of your control. And in those situations, you must remain in as much control of yourself as possible and slow the game down. Like, that's in combat, that's in sport, and frankly, that's just in life. So Lewis developed this definition for adaptive thinking that's developing a creative solution to a complex problem in a timely manner. And you need all three of those. If you have a creative solution, but it took you forever to get there, it's not going to help. If it's a simple solution and it's a simple problem, then we don't really have an urgency. So you really need all three of those. And this fits nicely with the concept that, we, all three of us, talk about all the time, and that's having a growth mindset. As humans, we're actually wired for adaptation, and as we adapt, we grow. The opposite of that growth mindset is when you hear things like, you should always, or you should never. And these become indicators of a potential fixed mindset, at least on the particular topic at the time. Right? So reality is life is fluid, and the very best performers adapt again and again and again. So, and just think about, like, over the last, 14, 15, 16 months, think of how much adaptation we've experienced and how much we've grown. And we're doing things now that were unheard of a year ago, and we can. And so let's go ahead and unpack the components of this adaptive thinking movement. There's four key concepts that in this particular model, and I'm going to hit each of them individually too. So I'll rattle them off first, and then I'll go into each one. It's composure, situational awareness, mental agility, and learned instinct. Right, so the first one, I say composure. Now, when Lewis wrote this, he actually used the phrase commander's calm because he was writing it for a military audience. But the commander's calm is basically your composure under pressure. So this is important. Now, being composed doesn't mean that you're stoic. It means that you're in control of yourself. You can be fired up. You can be a fiery personality. You can be a stoic personality. You can be somewhere in between. Be you, but be in control of you, because nobody wants to follow someone who's losing it. Like somebody who stresses out and just freaks out over stuff, it's exhausting to try to follow them. So composure under pressure gives you the foundation to allow the other three components to work. Second one is situational awareness. So when you're composed, as I mentioned, the game slows down and you can be more tuned in to the actual situation. Under stress, humans tend to miss really important information in the environment that impacts split-second decisions. So if you've gained or regained the composure, your ability to recognize critical information in the environment goes up, which allows you then to make better decisions. It may not be great decisions. Some situations you're looking for the least bad decision, but you can get there because you're in control of yourself and your thought processes. So the third one is mental agility. You're going to hear more about mental agility shortly. So for now, I'm just going to say that in high stress moments, you know what the most important thing is in any given moment, and you can shift your attention to that thing. And then you can shift it again and again and again as the situation evolves. So in performance psychology, we talk a lot about attention control. And part of the attention control is that intentional controlled shift. So the fourth component here is learned instinct. Basically, over time, we as humans intuitively know stuff because we've been immersed in it, because our brains are processing information in ways we're still figuring it out. There's some really cool research, and literally just this past week plus, I've been delving into some research on how our brain basically has a slow track and a fast track. And the slow track we're very much aware of, and it's very detailed, and the fast track is happening and we don't even know it. And that turns out to be the track that's involved so much in how we learn about leadership and how we learn about coaching. So much of it, it's observation, it's being in the environment, and then you just kind of get this sense. And later on, you figure out, well, what is my philosophy about this and so forth. So this learned instinct is something that all of us have the ability to do. And it's also a lifelong journey. There's no single end state to this. So again, Adrianna and I have talked, and Nicole has also in her type of work, about the growth mindset, about lifelong learning, about having a philosophy of mastery. All of that is super helpful in looking at the adaptive thinking components, because these concepts, they all build on each other and they also reinforce each other, and they allow us to be more effective at problem solving in big moments with high stakes. So with the foundation of adaptive thinking in place, I'm now going to kick it over to Adrianna to share some insights on resilience and mindfulness.
And that means I have to unmute. Thanks, Carl. So I will start us off with resilience, transfer through mindfulness, and then hand it off to Nicole to wrap up. But with resilience, we're going to take our time and just work through it, because resilience can be seen as kind of a buzzword right now. And so this definition we have up front: a resilient person is someone who is willing to take calculated, necessary risks to capitalize on opportunity. And we're going to break it down. But before we do that, I want to just recognize this is based on the work of Dr. Karen Ravitch out of UPenn. She's their director of their positive psychology program there. And so she's really studied and practiced resilience, which is where this information is mostly going to be coming from. But like I said, we're going to break it down for a minute and recognize that the main parts here is someone who's willing to take calculated and necessary risks, not someone who just puts themselves in any risky situation to prove that they are resilient. This I like to think of for any of us who have ever seen the movie Lion King, the Simba analogy, right? When Simba and Mufasa have that really great bonding moment after Simba recklessly goes into the lairs with all the, the hyenas in it. And he goes, oh, well, I was just trying to be brave like you, Dad. And he's like, well, I'm only brave when I have to be. Resilience has that same energy, has that same flow, where I'm resilient when I have to be, when it's necessary to take those risks, and they're calculated, they're not random. And then to, again, capitalize on an opportunity that's in front of us, whether that's an adversity or whatever the opportunity may present as. It's also the ability to grow and thrive in the face of challenges and bounce back from adversity, right? So here we have the images of the tennis ball and the egg. We'd much rather be able to take the tennis ball, throw it against the wall, and be able to bounce back like it than the egg that would probably just crack apart and then we'd have a messy wall. What's also great about the tennis ball image is that depending on the impact, we can actually bounce back harder, faster, stronger than we were originally headed towards the wall, right? And so we won't spend too much time on this term, but it's our first introduction to the idea of post-traumatic growth. If we are a resilient individual, and I'm going to talk through some of the competencies that build resilience. But if we embrace these competencies and these aspects and really embrace the idea of resiliency, we can face an adversity and come out stronger from it. So adversity does not have to always mean a downward spiral from there. And that'll be next slide, Nicole. So like I mentioned, here are the 6 competencies of resilience. And much like Carl went through the mental agility competencies or components, I'll state them and then work through some of them or all of them. We're starting out self-awareness. So self-awareness is really just our ability to identify our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors, and recognize, are we falling into any patterns with these? Where am I having these repetitive thoughts? What are patterns in my behavior that sometimes are helping, but sometimes might be harming? And then can I look at them and can I actually reflect from a viewpoint of honesty and openness, and really leading with curiosity? Because when I lead with curiosity, I'm leaving judgment behind. Because as soon as I start to review or reflect with judgment, I'm going to limit myself in terms of what I can really learn from that adversity or opportunity. Self-regulation builds beautifully on top of self-awareness. As we say all the time, we can't change what we're not aware of. So a lot of times the rest of these competencies fall on top of self-awareness. But with self-regulation, we're looking at the ability to regulate those impulses, our emotions, our physiology, and our behaviors, right? Okay, so now I'm aware of them. Can I actually regulate them? Can we express our emotions appropriately, right? Anyone can get mad, but it is a skill to get mad at the right person at the right time. And what do we do about that, right? Am I exploding at a probably not great time, or am I losing my composure, as Carl was saying, right? How can we actually become aware and then regulate those things? Optimism, my favorite, and we could talk about optimism all day long, mostly because we're not talking rainbows and butterflies, right? When we're talking about optimism in terms of resiliency, we're talking about optimism tied to reality, the reality of the situation that you're in right now. And so that includes being able to identify what is controllable, right? Because when I'm identifying what's controllable, I'm also recognizing that I'm not going to spend energy on what isn't, because energy is probably finite. Well, we know energy is finite, right? So I'm putting it towards something that's important and what I can actually mobilize and do something with. When we talk about optimism, we're talking about fighting the negativity bias. It's human nature to go downward spiral to as you're going to say, like I said, it is human nature to notice the negative things in life. It's what got us to this point, right? Is noticing the bad things and having a plan for outside of it. But can we not live there? Can, again, we see the realistic side of our situation and then do something about it? And that then in turn helps us maintain hope and increase confidence in ourselves, our abilities in that situation. And also tying it back to team dynamics, increases our confidence in our teammates as well. Because ideally, we've been going through some stuff together and learning and growing together. As we take on mental agility, like Carl said, the Army has a lot of acronyms. We want to think FAT. And when I say that, we want to think flexible, we want to think accurately, and we want to think thoroughly. And so this is where not only do we want to be able to identify problems, but also understand them. If there is a problem that we are seeing repetitively come up time and time again, and we think, okay, we fixed it, but it keeps popping up, we're probably not fixing the actual problem. We probably have to do some work and identify what's the actual root. Do I have that deeper understanding of it? And then can I take others' perspectives to solve this problem? And can I be willing to try new strategies, right? A lot of times we think, oh, well, this is the way I've always done something. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but it also doesn't mean it's the only way to do something. So can I take another perspective? Can I try a different solution, a different strategy? Strengths of character. Do we know and understand our own individual character strengths and then how to leverage them to meet our goals and to overcome challenges? And also as leaders, do we understand how to bring out the best character strengths in others, recognizing that they might be different from us? Right? So I probably don't have the same character strengths as Carl or Nicole or anyone else on this call, because we're all amazing individual people. Can we still find ways to bring out the best in each other, especially in a working environment? And then last but not least, connection. Again, like I said, definitely not least, because without strong relationships, we really can't get by. And so can we build and develop strong relationships? Can we use effective communication and develop empathy instead of sympathy in terms of also supporting others and recognizing that it's okay and it's a symbol of strength to communicate when we need support as well, right? Because like I said, no one gets through it on their own. And so being able to be vulnerable in a moment and help build that connection as well is only going to help take us forward. And so one last thing on competencies and resilience overall is that language matters, right? And this will be a theme you'll see, I'm sure, over the next day as well, is that the language we use matters and it always means something. And so we used to think of resiliency in terms of, you had to be invincible and invulnerable, but that really set the tone and set a picture that that was something you were just born with. In reality, resilience is something we can grow, right? That's why we're talking about these skills we can develop. We can become more resilient over time, making it more of an ordinary magic, right? Resiliency exists, our opportunities to be resilient can exist in our everyday, day-to-day moments. It doesn't have to be a big event, but just how we handle our business, like I said, day-to-day in the little moments that build up. And so with that, we will move on to mindfulness. Okay, so as we get into mindfulness, again, we're starting with the definition because a lot of these terms can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So let's get a baseline understanding up front. And this is the definition based off of John Kabat-Zinn work. And he did a really great job popularizing mindfulness in the Western Hemisphere. So as you can see up there, the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose to the present moment non-judgmentally. Again, we're bringing in that non-judgmentally piece, and we're going to break it down to the two primary characteristics that we see here, and that's acceptance and awareness. So we talk about acceptance, again, little asterisk, language matters. Acceptance does not mean approval. I can accept the situation without approving of the situation. It doesn't mean I'm going to like it. It just means that I can let it go. I can let it be, and I cannot actively push it away. That's acceptance. I'm not putting mental, emotional, physical energy and pushing away whatever it is that's going on. I'm simply letting it be, and that's accepting it. Same thing with awareness. There's two main attention styles in how we pay attention, right? So there's the dissociative style where we tend to check out, or there's the associative style in which we check in with what we're going through. And with that, it's really important to think, well, what do we want our athletes to do or students to do in class, on the field, at practice? Do we want them checking in or do we want them checking out? And then how often do we actually practice these things? How often do we train these things? Overall, this approach to mindfulness in sport performance, however you want to tackle the idea of mindfulness in motion, really allows us to take a more objective approach and not be so critical of ourselves in the situation and ourselves in general. So we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so here we have, so our self-regulatory capacities and our performance facilitators. And these performance facilitators will start there, really build off that last slide, and then promote the regulatory capacities that we'll talk about. But let's get into our performance facilitators. So we have number one, starting with concentration. Can we use present moment anchors to direct our focus? And your anchors can be anything you choose before you need it, right? Are we going to choose to anchor to our breath? Are we going to choose to anchor to the grip on our bat? What do we want to choose as our anchor? And then also we need to practice concentrating, using those present moment anchors to connect back and direct our focus. Ties beautifully into, again, that idea of letting go. Since we know our reactions to our experiences can interfere with our performance, can we practice noticing those thoughts, reactions, feelings, and bringing our mind back to that anchor? That's the true practice of letting something go. Again, I'm not pushing it away. I'm just bringing my moment and bringing my mind back to the moment. Relaxation. This is a tricky one because a lot of people think, oh, relaxation is the goal of mindfulness, or it's the same thing. And that's not the truth. This is not the primary goal, nor is it the same thing. Two very different things we're talking about here. But what we do know is that learning to notice and release excess tension in the body can help our performance, right? And so if I'm performing tense with my shoulders up to my ears, I might benefit from taking a deep breath, relaxing a bit, and letting my body loosen up. Now, as we talk about, establishing a sense of harmony and rhythm, by integrating the above performance facilitators, we really can help ourselves get out of our own way and connect to the totality of the performance, right? Notice and be aware and connected to all of the factors at play. And then that allows us to find an effortless rhythm in what we're doing. And then last but not least, again, forming key associations. So little asterisk there, our language matters, right? So can we create meaningful cues and integrate helpful self-talk within and outside of the performance environment, right? Because if we're not practicing outside, it's not always going to correlate to inside the performance environment. And can those things help remind us to be mindful when we feel ourselves starting to stray? So like I said, language does matter. So what am I associating a good outcome with, or a bad feeling, or what should be happening? These are things that I need to really be aware of in terms of my associations that have meaning for what I feel, how I react, and then what I can do about it. And now, like I said, these performance facilitators, they impact our ability for regulation. And so we talk about attention regulation and emotion regulation all the time, just in different languages. If you've heard us talk before, Carl and myself, we tend to go towards attention control and energy management. Again, we'll break it down a little bit here. Attention regulation is the idea, right? The ability to have our focus on the right thing at the right time, and to shift smoothly and intentionally when the focus has changed. If my attention is on the right thing at the right time, great starting point. But a lot of times our sports, our performances are fluid. Our attention is going to have to be as well. So can I not get stuck? Can I recognize when my attention needs to shift and shift smoothly with the next thing? And then emotion regulation, like I said, we talk about typically in terms of energy management, but it is much more complex than the idea that negative emotions are bad and positive emotions are good in terms of performance, right? This is something that's extremely personal with how we think and how we feel, and understanding that does need some time to develop and some critical thinking and reflection on our own part. And so this is also the idea of the acceptance of and willingness to experience any emotion that's cultivated through the mindfulness practice can come up big in an athletic performance. So what I mean by that is, can I experience doubt in a performance? Can my mind wander? Whatever it may be in mindfulness. Can I experience doubt and still move forward onto what's important next, right? Into my present moment, where I am right now. Can I experience disappointment, surprise, upset, hype, and insert emotion there, and still bring myself back to the moment, knowing that this moment is all that matters now, right? And so all of these, performance facilitators, self-regulatory capacities tie back in massively to the idea that when we talk about controlling the controllable, we have to start with ourselves, and then ourselves in the situation, and growing our awareness in both ourselves and our situations around us. Both things take time and take practice. And like Carl said, you never arrive, right? You never just become, you are one with mindfulness, or you are one resilient individual. This is something that we grow in, and we continuously can strive to get better in, as it is a lifelong journey. So with that, I'll kick it over to Nicole for thriving.
There we go. Thanks, Adriana. So before we jump into thriving, I'm just going to ask everyone to self-reflect for a few seconds on a time in recent history in your life when things were going really well. Everything was kind of going with the flow. You were almost living in a flow state. Doesn't necessarily have to be anything related to your job, but just an event in life or a time in life where you felt that, gosh, if I could just kind of keep life the way that it is right now, I would be set for the rest of my life. There could have been challenges that you faced during that time, but you might have overcome them. You likely overcame them. Take a second just to reflect on what that moment was. I'll ask you next to reflect on an opposite moment, a moment that was really tough to go through, one where it felt like you weren't quite sure how to solve it, one where it felt like you weren't quite sure what steps to take to make things feel better or to make things feel manageable. Now I'm going to take a wild guess and throw out there that I bet you that second prompt, that event came to your mind more quickly. We are programmed as humans to live in a survival mode, and that's because survival works, right? Sometimes we're not putting a ton of energy into living life. Sometimes we're not using all of our internal or external resources to tackle whatever challenges might be in front of us, because that's just what we need for that moment. And over the last 16 months, we've faced this collective survival mode. It's been really interesting because we've been forced to figure out, okay, how do we deal with a pandemic? I have no idea, right? How do we do it and then come out on the other side a little shinier, a little healthier, a little stronger? Well, we figured it out. What this has done is forced our hand to think about, how do we thrive? How do we move from survival to thriving? And the reality of things is, these are two concepts that exist on the same spectrum, right? On one end, we have thriving, and on the other hand, we have surviving. And again, both work for different situations, but I bet you that we can think of several instances where we've worked with athletes this year and we've seen them surviving. And I know that as healthcare and helping and coaching professionals, we don't want to see that. We want to see them thrive. So we've been talking a lot this year about, okay, what is thriving and how do we help ourselves and our athletes achieve that? So what we're going to start off with is thinking about, what is thriving? What makes it up? So thriving is living optimally with balance across all of the different components or parts that we have in life. The balance is key here. So think about all the parts of your life, right? You might be a coach, you might be a mom, you might be a dad, you might be a professor, you might be a mental health professional or a physician or a trainer. You might be an artist, you might be a karaoke professional, right? All of these different really meaningful parts of our life. If we tend to all of those different parts with equity, then we create balance. So big difference between equity and equality, right? Equality refers to attending to things with the same level of resource across the different parts of life. But we want to talk about equity, which is giving the necessary energy and attention at varying levels across the different parts of life. So for example, if we think back to our schooling days when we had an exam, when we think about the academic part of life and we have that exam coming up, we're probably investing a lot of our energy in that particular domain or that particular part of life. We're studying for that exam. Maybe we tend to social life a little less. Maybe we tend to romantic life a little bit less, but we don't necessarily shut them out. We just shift our equity energy to that particular domain to help us thrive. The other key component to this optimal living is purpose. It's more than going through the motions of life. It's tackling life with meaning. It's tackling life with doing things and participating in activities that carry meaning for us, that carry value for us. When we participate in things that don't feed our values, we tend not to feel super great. So thriving is living with that optimal purpose base and that balance across our different life domains. And as Adrianna and Carl were talking about, thriving also has this component of recognizing that we're going to face obstacles and challenges. We will screw up. There is no doubt about that in life. And thriving plays a role here. The impact when we think about thriving here for when we face mistakes is that we face them head on. We don't make room for avoidance. Or if we face something that forces us into survival mode, which again is okay, sometimes we have to go there. Once you recover, we remove avoidance as an option and we get after whatever we need to get after to get to our goal or to re-engage with the journey that we're on. Thriving also means experiencing a full range of emotion, the good, the bad, the ugly, the emotions we love to sit with and the emotions we would rather never sit with again. So everything from happiness to contentment, all the way down to stress, disgust, self-judgment, all of it, right? Those who thrive make space for themselves. And that's the key phrase here, making space for the self. When we can allow ourselves to feel what we need to feel, it increases our confidence. It increases our ability to tend to those around us, all because we're allowing ourselves to validate how we're feeling. And to include the theme that we've touched on throughout our presentation so far, it's approaching life flexibly. I know that we might experience the same problems throughout life more than once, and how we approach it across those different data points might be completely different. So if I'm having an issue with my car in December, maybe I need an oil change. But if an issue is happening again in March, maybe I need to get the tires realigned or something like that. We approach challenges and we approach life flexibly to attend to the situation that's at hand versus just taking a staunch one size fits all approach to problem solving. So just as much as we need to understand what thriving is, we also need to understand what it isn't, right? I think thriving gets this reputation, kind of like Adrianna was talking about earlier with optimism, right? Where it's like everything is rainbows and butterflies and you have to be super happy all the time. And that is so not the case. It's absolutely not true. So thriving isn't being happy all the time. It's not just having a positive outlook. It's having a flexible outlook. It's letting yourself feel what you need to feel. It's definitely not being perfect at everything all of the time. And it's most certainly not suppressing negative emotions or thoughts. When we do that, we invalidate ourselves, or we should all over ourselves, right? Like, I shouldn't be feeling that, or I should have approached that situation this way. When we judge our own emotions, that leads to, when we judge our own emotions and try to force ourselves into this supremely positive way of looking at and approaching life, it creates something called the positivity trap. And this is something important to call out because I think it's something that we probably see a lot of our athletes fall into sometimes, this idea that they have to be this perfect, amazing, elite athlete 24/7, which of course components of that are absolutely true. But just like with anything, there is such thing as too much of a good thing. And that's what the positivity trap is. So the positivity trap can be really damaging because it allows us space to judge ourselves. It basically says it allows us the space to, or it allows us to adopt this way of thinking where we judge the emotions that we have. Like, I don't want to be sad. I can't believe I'm feeling sad about this, or I shouldn't be feeling anxious about this situation. The problem with that is that leads to some pretty negative outcomes, like we have listed here in the second bullet: low self-esteem, negative self-talk, anxiousness, and depression. So things, the main takeaway here to think through is the importance of allowing emotional space, allowing yourself to take up emotional space, or helping an athlete understand that it's okay for them to take up the emotional space that they need. And kind of the catchphrase in the way that I think about this is this: emotional suppression can lead to depression. And what do we know about depression? It's really hard to deal with. It takes our energy away. It makes us overthink things. It basically removes our sense of joy, and sometimes can even cause numbness, right? Where we're living at the point where we're not living with any purpose. It's beyond just going through the motions. It's simply existing. When we fall into this positivity trap, there's room for that to occur. So if you take away anything for this particular piece, remember that space to feel is cool. And if we can avoid that depressive state, then that's absolutely what we want to do. So how do we do that, right? I have a 6 component recipe, more or less, for how do we thrive. And just like the military, I also love acronyms. So I'm going to put all of these components up here. And as you're thinking about these different components, and if you want to remember them later, just remember GLOMIX. So thriving, you give yourself empathy and space to feel what you need to feel. When you give yourself permission to do that, it changes everything. That's often the first step in what it takes to learn how to regulate one's own emotion, right? So initially it might kind of feel like a fire hose of emotion pouring out when you're like, all right, I'm just going to take my emotional space. If I need to be angry or frustrated or confused or sad, it's kind of like letting that fire hose open, right? But over time, what you learn is how to control the amount of water coming out of that fire hose. Living intentionally is the next ingredient, so to speak. You live according to your value systems and you live with purpose. And it's important to recognize and respect that everybody has different value systems. So the way you see one person living their life might be completely different from how you live yours. And that's okay. As long as you're living intentionally and with purpose, that increases your likelihood for thriving. Our next ingredient is owning your strengths. Owning where you succeed in life, like what your character strengths are, what your behavioral and your emotional and your cognitive strengths are. We're all really good at stuff, right? To put it plainly, we are. And I think that it's really helpful when we give ourselves space to say, you know what, this is what I'm good at. And when we allow ourselves to do that, not only do we tap into our strengths more often, what we know from the research is that those around us tend to benefit from those strengths. And I think ultimately we would find in a lot of our athletes that they are caretakers and want to make sure that their teammates are well cared for, sometimes even more than themselves. So when we can model owning our own strengths, it allows others around to benefit as well. Maintaining a supportive social circle is the next ingredient, and this one's pretty critical. Sometimes in life, we might find ourselves surrounded by folks who misalign with our values or treat us with hypocrisy, or maybe walk the walk but don't talk the talk, or vice versa, whatever, and how they treat us. And that feels pretty crappy. But something about us makes us keep that relationship, right? Or something about that situation makes us keep that relationship when really we might be beneficial from letting it go or drawing some healthy boundaries within that relationship. What you really want to make sure you do is keep folks around you who you can have reciprocal relationships with. When you need to pour your cup out into theirs, you know that there's space to do that. And they know that of you, that they can pour their cup into yours when they need it from you. That reciprocation is really key for thriving relationships and for thriving at the individual level. Bringing up the challenges, we don't look away, right? Thriving is this component of, or this ingredient of thriving here is basically looking the challenge or the failure or the misstep or the mistake, whatever you want to call it, in the face. And you're not going to like what you see, right? Like, who likes looking at failures and mistakes? Not a soul. No one does. But what we do when we face our mistakes is we can turn it into fuel to get back again to our goal or to whatever journey that we're on. And I like to use the phrase, don't make avoidance an option. If you're in survival mode, maybe it needs to be. And again, that's okay. But when you're in a space where you're looking to thrive, avoidance is not an option. And then the final ingredient here that we spoke to just a second ago is saying no, drawing healthy boundaries in life. When we're able to say no for ourselves, if you, for example, if you've had a really long week at work and then your friend hits you up at 7 o'clock Friday evening and they're like, hey, let's go get drinks, or, you know, whatever the social invite might be. And you're like, oh, that sounds like so much fun, but I would just love to couch surf this night away, right? Sometimes we think, well, if I say no, my friend's going to be upset with me. Or, you know, insert other person judging me here for saying no, when the reality of things is people really tend to respect when we draw boundaries respectfully. So when we can say no to situations that we don't have the energy for, that we don't have the cognitive capacity to tend to, not only is that respecting you, but that's respecting the other person involved. And that is a kindness. And ultimately, that's what we want as our final component of thriving, because what is thriving at the end of the day? It's showing the self-kindness. And to wrap us up here, we'll bring it home with one of the greats, good old Michael Jordan, right? He speaks to thriving. He's an excellent example. He says here in this quote, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. Think about that. 9,000 shots. Like, whose arms are just tired thinking about that, right? It's a lot. He says, I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and I failed or I've missed. I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. That is the definition of thriving. It's facing adversity and doing what we need to do to get back to whatever our success is. Again, whether that's a fluid journey or whether that's a specific goal you're working on. He is an example of what it means for folks to thrive. So with that, it brings us to the end of our formal presentation here. Let me just stop the share. I think one of the wonderful things about our collaboration between performance psychology and CAPS is that, as Carl mentioned earlier, and we often talk about this, that a lot of our work kind of crosses the bounds of both departments. So we're all really excited to attend to your questions, and just let us know who you'd like to hear from, and we'll go from there.
Thank you for the presentation. In terms of how that works, adaptive thinking and resilience, mindfulness, and thriving. If if we don't have goals, maybe daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, then this 4 component doesn't work. So we need to have some sort of goals to actually do that. So that in order to accomplish goals, you need to have better adaptive thinking and resilience, and it might perhaps may need to have a mindfulness and then thriving. That is, you need to have balance to accomplish maybe goals. So you need to have goals to setting, maybe important to actually work with these 4 components.
I'll jump in for a second, and then obviously they can clean up what I screw up. I think you bring up a really good point, and I would want to expand what the typical understanding of goals might be. Because if it's an outcome goal versus a performance goal, or maybe a lifestyle goal, so having a focal point for the things that you're developing are important. Like, why do I want to build these skills? Why do I want to evolve my skills so I can be more complete, more balanced, healthier, whatever it might be? You can absolutely apply all of these skills in pursuing a particular outcome. And there's probably a lot more that you'd have to pack into that as well, in terms of sub goals and processes and so forth. But if you take a more qualitative view of goal setting and the way you want to be, that can help remind you why you're engaging in these different skills. But again, so many of those skills, it's not so that I can accomplish a task, although it might be in some cases. It's really for you as the individual to help you be the most evolved version of yourself that you can be. So that's just a perspective.
Yeah, and that's hard to follow. There's not much to clean up there, Carl. But I will just say too, like in terms of performance, we can just view living life as a performance, right? And so it doesn't have to be an academic performance on an exam or for a paper. It doesn't have to be a performance in the pool. And so I'm, like Carl said, I'm doing these things for an outcome, or I'm practicing these practices and developing these skills just so I can swim a little bit faster or hit the ball a little bit harder. I'm doing it because it enhances me as an individual, and that in turn enhances my life as an individual and as part of a society, right? Because again, we're all in this together. And so how am I contributing and relating to the people around me?
I absolutely echo all of that, and add that sometimes I walk it back to purpose with folks. Just ask, what's your purpose? With whatever the event is or the circumstances that this person is dealing with, ask, what's your purpose? And then kind of build from there. And sometimes it's fluid, sometimes it's concrete, but bringing it back to that, I think, is really meaningful for folks, because it helps them land in their own shoes in a way that is concrete and less sort of like in the air about trying to resolve whatever might be going on.
Can I ask a question? Sam Slobodoff for Nicole, right here. Carl, I'm from old sports psychology school, among this, the Bob Singer and Deborah Phelps and Dan Gould and Terry Ehrlich and name it. And that was a quote back in their 80s, and they say the brain is not garbage can, we can put everything in it. To be a good athlete, they have to be kind of selective in terms of they have limited resources. Now it looks like the new tendency, paradigm shift, like in a mindfulness and actually the thinking too much, associating thoughts with the negative emotion, regulation and emotion, something creative thinking. Is it something serious like a shift in paradigm, or is it elaboration of the old school?
Wow. I think it's a little bit of both. And also maybe some misunderstanding of both as well. And when it comes to the mindfulness example that you brought up, I would defer to Adrianna, who's way more skilled in that area than I am. But it's some of what we're seeing is putting new language on old skills. Some of it is, for lack of a better phrase, reinventing something so you can put your name on it. It is, that happens a lot with some of the bumper sticker psychology type stuff, and you come up with new sequencing of words, and then you just put your name on it and so forth. But I also think that we are seeing an evolution in our understanding of how the brain works in the different capacities that we can exercise. But there's also maybe the 21st century analogy to the garbage can where you throw everything in might be social media, where you just become absolutely consumed by all the stuff that's out there, because nobody can know everything, but you spend all your time trying to figure it all out. I do think at the end of the day, when you peel back so much of what we see at like sports psych conferences and so forth, it's variations on a theme. Adrianna talked a little bit about, that emotion regulation and energy management, stress management, all kind of fit within one big bucket, and people use the terms a little bit differently. The same could be said for different approaches to relaxation training or attention control, attentional shifts and things like that. So I do think it's a little bit of both, but I'll defer to Adrianna and Nicole for their opinion on that.
Thanks. Yeah, it's always interesting to hear different perspectives on things. I heard the garbage can analogy and immediately just went to, your toolbox, right? Because we want to know everything we possibly can. We want to have all these tools at our disposal, whether it's attentive control skills or confidence skills or imagery skills. Yeah, I want to throw all those things in my toolbox, but I need to have the awareness and the knowledge of when to use what. And so I think that's where being mindful in the moment really comes into play, because I'm aware of all the factors at play, and that lets me choose more wisely from my toolbox. So yeah, that's just where my brain went, but I don't know if that's super helpful. Nicole, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, my thoughts are similar, just kind of like reconceptualizing the phrase for sure. And I think that being able to speak for this day and age, I find that folks are perhaps more open to speaking about, whether it's a mental issue related to performance or a clinical issue related to mental health. I find that folks are a bit more friendly to having those conversations. So I think that changes how we think about having conversations related to performance enhancement or clinical mental health in athletes. So I think that, or perhaps should say, I wonder if there's maybe a larger shift around the friendliness that we give to these particular topics that we're seeing.
I saw a comment in the chat I want to make sure to get to. There's a question that popped up earlier, and this is a polarizing question because the field is not unified on it. But the question that was in there: are there specific methods or strategies a coach can use for measuring or tracking athletic performance flow state within their teams? And so I'll give you my bias on this because I've been in a lot of conversations lately on it, and I'm not expecting anybody to necessarily agree. But over the last couple of decades, I got a chance to talk with the leading researchers in flow state, and almost all of them have abandoned it, largely because it's a passive experience. You can't put somebody into a flow state. There's an altered space and time, and generally speaking, there's a lack of memory of what even took place in that flow state. You might be firing on all cylinders and automatic, but the minute you think about being in that flow state, you're out, right? And it happens so rarely, and we don't even understand how we slip into it. But there's, the essential parts of the brain are turned on, the non-essential parts of the brain are turned off. Nobody's been able to put somebody into the zone. There's another line of inquiry actually that looked at some point we would if we lived in a flow state all the time, at some point we would be so bored because we're not building memories, we're not connecting emotionally to the moment, that we'd stop the activity and move on to something else that's exhilarating. So for the researchers that I've talked to in there, they would not want to do that. Alternatively, if you follow some of the things that we teach on a regular basis, which is understanding mind-body interaction, understanding confidence as a skill, attention control as a skill, energy management as a skill, visualization is a skill, and you integrate all of those into your personal action plan, you're going to get really close to the upper end of your potential on a consistent basis and still remember it. So I would focus more on performance optimization and performance excellence versus flow. Again, my opinion.
Yeah, I think the same thing. I think flow, like Carl said, the minute you are consciously aware that you're in flow, you're out of flow. And so that's why mindfulness does parallel with a flow state. But again, the minute you are objectively trying to be mindful, it kind of outplays itself, right? And so it's that idea of just being here, not being judgmental. And when you're talking about measuring or tracking flow state, that would, like Carl said, be super reactive to it, right? Like maybe we can look at if you're wearing, HRV things and, oh, you seem to be in a flow state. What could that be? But there's no exact correlation or causation of what can get you there. So I would be wary of if someone or some company or whatever is out there saying, yeah, we could track this or we could put you in that, because that just might not be the case.
Any other questions from the community? All right. Well, just want to take a second and thank everyone that spent time on the front end to prepare and to deliver a message today. Thank you everybody for being in attendance. One thing in studying professional development, especially as it pertains to adults, professional development, it often doesn't exist in an ideal situation in isolation, but rather it's stranded over the course of a career. So I would encourage you to continue to build community, whether it's here, whether it's people here in Penn State's community or people within your individual sport or activity. I think anytime we can provide context for the learning opportunities as well, it can be very powerful. So what we're going to do here is we'll leave this open for about 30 minutes afterwards. If anybody wants to use the chat function to reach out to anybody, exchange contact information, if I can help be a vehicle for that as well, please let me know. Tomorrow, day 2, we will start at 1 o'clock as well, just like today. It'll go until 4 o'clock.